Canada is the second largest country on Earth. It's bigger than the United States, it's bigger than China, and honestly, it's bigger than almost every other country you can name. Yet when you really look at it, something about Canada seems, well, almost impossible. We're talking about millions of square kilometers of land, majestic mountains, dense forests, countless lakes, and just endless stretching wilderness, with almost nobody living there. In fact, the vast majority of Canadians live in a narrow little strip right close to the United States border. So it really makes you wonder, why does one of the richest, most developed countries in the entire world leave so much of its land almost completely untouched? Well, the answer is an incredible combination of geography, history, and climate that shaped an entire nation.
To really understand Canada's empty spaces, we first have to look at the land itself. Because let's be honest, when we look at a standard map, we're kind of being tricked. We naturally assume that massive borders equal a massive, evenly spread population, right? We just assume people are everywhere.
But size alone absolutely does not equal population. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it puts things into perspective. The entire country of Canada, this absolute giant on the map, actually has a smaller population than the greater metropolitan area of Tokyo. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. Massive physical size just does not guarantee a place where people can actually live.
Part 1. The unforgiving land. So we first need to look closely at the harsh geography of the land itself.
Think about it like this. A country can have millions of square kilometers of land without actually having land you can build on. It's kind of like owning a huge backyard. It doesn't help you much if the entire thing is a giant swamp. Having space doesn't automatically mean having easy-to-live-on space. So what exactly is stopping this giant Canadian backyard from being settled?
Let's move to and see how this builds. The main culprit here is something called the Canadian Shield. Now, this isn't just a patch of rocks. It is a colossal, ancient geological formation that covers roughly half the entire country. It is defined by incredibly thin soil just resting on top of solid bedrock, along with deep, unyielding permafrost. Add in the towering Rocky Mountains out west, and winters that frankly last for most of the year, and widespread habitation isn't just difficult, it is a literal engineering nightmare. The land itself actively pushes back against settlement.
Part 2. The 100-mile belt. This brings us to the geographical reality that effectively decided where Canadians would actually build their lives.
Because the North is just so incredibly unforgiving, it created a pretty stark reality for the country. Check this out. A staggering 90% of Canadians live in a narrow strip right along the U.S. border. 90%? That tiny sliver remaining, that represents everyone else scattered across the vast, massive northern territories. So practically speaking, Canada is essentially a long, narrow country clinging tightly to its southern edge.
And the logic behind this dramatic divide really just comes down to simple survival and economics. The southern edge offered much milder climates, which crucially allowed for large-scale agriculture. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be able to feed a growing nation. Furthermore, early historical trade routes relied almost entirely on proximity to the U.S. and southern waterways. Over the centuries, this specific narrow corridor just naturally became the undeniable beating heart of Canada's population.
Part 3. The illusion of emptiness. But there is something most people don't realize when they look at this map.
We really need to reframe our thinking here, because empty definitely does not mean unused or meaningless. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples give an absolute masterclass in not just surviving, but thriving in this incredibly harsh environment. Later on, European explorers in the massive, booming fur trade relied entirely on navigating these wild, untamed spaces. And eventually, this all culminated in the westward expansion and the monumental, almost crazy engineering feat of the Canadian Railway, which literally stitched this seemingly impossible wilderness together.
So the crucial point is, Canada's wilderness is not a blank void at all. It is much better understood as a massive, overflowing vault protecting some of the absolute most valuable materials on planet Earth. These remote regions are a literal resource powerhouse. We're talking about colossal energy reserves, huge oil and natural gas fields out west. We're talking about massive mining operations extracting gold and even diamonds straight from the frozen earth. And let's not forget the endless rushing rivers up north, providing staggering amounts of hydroelectric power. This seemingly empty land, it's actually the economic engine generating immense wealth for the entire country.
Part 4. Why can't Canada just build more cities? Which, of course, leads to the most logical next question.
If this northern land is so incredibly wealthy, why doesn't Canada just go ahead and build shiny new cities right next to these resources?
Well, because building on this land is a relentless, exhausting battle. Imagine trying to engineer roads that won't just buckle and collapse over melting permafrost every spring. You have to lay down electricity and transport basic goods across thousands of kilometers of absolute isolation, all while fighting severe extreme weather at literally every turn. Economically speaking, taming this wilderness is just monumentally more expensive and difficult than simply expanding down south.
Part 5. The future map. But here's where things get really fascinating. Because this static map might be on the verge of a massive transformation.
We are heading into a future where the North could become fundamentally more important. As climate change actively alters global weather patterns, it's warming regions that were previously way too hostile for large settlements. Melting ice is suddenly opening up new, highly coveted Arctic shipping lanes that could redefine global trade. And as the whole world shifts toward renewable energy, the demand for the rare minerals buried in the Canadian Shield is absolutely surging. Suddenly, Canada's frozen north isn't just an empty backyard anymore. It's positioning itself right at the center of the future global economy.
Which brings us all the way back around to the big overarching question we need to consider today. Is Canada's immense empty land a weakness, or is it actually its greatest advantage? Now, on one hand, having massive, unpopulated borders can definitely be seen as a geopolitical vulnerability. It's hard to defend what you don't occupy. But on the other hand, in an increasingly crowded, resource-hungry world, holding on to millions of square kilometers of precious fresh water, unbroken forests, and critical natural resources might just be the ultimate strategic asset any nation could ask for.
Canada's empty spaces represent something that is becoming incredibly rare in our modern world. A massive place where nature still completely dominates and where the future hasn't been entirely written yet. Because at the end of the day, sometimes the most valuable thing a country owns is not what it has built, it is what it has protected. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and as always, stay curious.
Thanks for watching World Decoded. Make sure to like and share, subscribe, and stay curious.